I had an actor friend of mine who was a very close friend, was production designer on all of Clint Eastwood's films, all of them, until he died. And he kind of told me all about how Clint Eastwood works as a director. And I love how Clint Eastwood works as a director. And so I decided from that point forward, I was going to work exactly the way that Clint Eastwood works. So here's how Clint Eastwood works as a director. He doesn't yell action. When the first AD, when they get rolling and they get up to speed with the sound and the camera, everything's up to speed and going. And of course, it happens all faster now when they're not running with the film and they're just doing digital. And then he just lets the set breathe a little bit, and then he very quietly says, "When you're ready," and lets the actors take it when they're ready. Because he said it's just really annoyingly not good to have that jarring action called, when, particularly in a very quiet scene or a very tender scene or a very, it's like you're just kind of trying to get into the energy of the scene, and all of a sudden action, it's like, whoa, it's like jarring. And even when you're trying to get the energy up, you can still say, "When you're ready," in a more upbeat way. You don't have to like jar people into the scene. You can just ease them into it and let them move and start the scene at their pace. The lovely thing that does is you're rolling and you're capturing footage before the scene starts. But the actors are in character before they actually start the scene, which means your editor can choose moments to put either in that scene or in reaction shots later in the scene or in other scenes, just because they've got good footage of the actors in character, which is awesome. Another thing I do is I don't call cut immediately after they say their last line. They say their last line and go, "And that's the end of the scene. Cut." Most inexperienced directors go, "Cut," and they immediately end the scene right there. But I let it linger. Oh, you should never call cut on yourself. That's an inexperienced actor. That's an inexperienced amateur actor who calls cut on themselves, or who finishes the scene and then turns to look at the director. It's like, oh, don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. And the first time an actor does that for me, I immediately take them aside and say, "Please don't do that again." I leave the camera rolling. Please don't ever do that again. Because I leave the camera rolling. Because there are moments at the end of the scene where you're staying in character, and sometimes a little improv moment comes out that's like so beautiful that you would never catch if you call cut. So I let it linger, usually 5 seconds, 6 seconds, sometimes 10, but I always let it linger at the end of the scene before I call cut, so that it just lets it breathe. It breathes at the beginning, it breathes at the end, and it allows the actors to stay in character, to get their energy going into the scene, find their way into the scene, and find their way out of the scene. That's how I direct actors. I do not micromanage their process. I expect them to come in prepared. I expect them to come in with their fully fleshed out character, bringing their work in to me. I usually film the rehearsal. I mean, once we've set it up on its feet and we've blocked it and everything, and then they put their makeup on, and we set up the lights. We do a blocking rehearsal first, and we decide which way we're gonna shoot it first, and then they go and get made up and hair and wardrobe while we set up all the lights and everything. And then we come in and we run it, and I usually film the rehearsal because I figure by then we're ready to start filming, and they're you know, sometimes there's some brilliant moments that happen in that rehearsal because they're not quite ready, but they are. But there's some wonderful, just spontaneous moments that happen that sometimes don't happen when it's too rehearsed and when it's too done. I try not to run the scene too many times. I find if you overrun a scene, it can get stale. And here's another little tip. If you're working with 2 actors in a scene together, or 3 or more, but I always do this, always, if I can. If one of your actors is less experienced than the others, this is a really good tip, guys. If one of your actors is less experienced than the others, shoot their coverage last. Shoot their coverage last. That way, they will have done the scene a dozen times. At least a half a dozen times, but probably closer to a dozen times, what with your master coverage and your over the shoulder, your single on the other actor or actors, and then by the time you turn the camera around to get their single coverage or the over the shoulder on them, you've shot that scene probably 8 times, 10 times at least, which has given them time to rehearse their lines, really get into character, really get comfortable with the scene, with their lines, with their character, and with the other actors. If they're at all intimidated in working with these name actors that they've never worked with before, it gets them comfortable working with these actors, you know, working the scene over and over again so that they are really comfortable. They're settled in their skin, they're settled into character, and now that they've done it over and over again, it's not going to be so intimidating for them. Now the trick is to make sure that it's not stale. And then you have to change it up a little bit. And I have little tricks, little directorial tricks that I give them. I make them do it faster, I make them do it slower, I have them do it without breathing, things like that, so that they don't get stale on the scene. How often do you correspond with your first AD during the process? Oh, the first AD? During the process of the filming or during the whole process? I'm corresponding with my first AD all the time. And during the filming process, he's on set, he's right there the whole time. He's running the set. And if I'm working with my first AD the whole thing. If I'm working with the first AD that's my regular first AD on my team, he knows how I work. And I know how he works, and we work together like a team, like a well-oiled machine. So he understands my process. We work really well together, so I love him. The last time I wanted to work with him, he wasn't going to be able to work, and then we had to postpone the shoot. Not because of him, but for other reasons we had to postpone the shoot, which is good because now he's going to be available for me. So what's the one thing you could tell amateur directors like you? Direct. Do it as much as you can, because the more you do it, the better you're going to get. And I would say that, yes, there are less opportunities to direct because it takes a little bit of money, it takes some equipment, it takes, a camera and lights and a few things. But you can take your iPhone out and you can get a couple actors and you can just shoot a scene. You can set up your iPhone on a tripod. It doesn't have to be professional. It doesn't have to be for any specific project. You can just get actors together and direct them in a scene. You can get a full-on script and get a bunch of actors together and do a table read and direct that. So there's a lot of opportunities to direct. It doesn't have to be necessarily in we're shooting a film professional setting to get experience directing. So do it as much as you possibly can, because the more you direct and the more you work with actors, and then watch films. Watch films, watch them. Look, and don't just watch them one time. Watch the classics. Watch John Huston. Watch Sidney Pollack. Watch the amazing filmmakers that direct the classic films, because these are the people who you're going to learn the most from. And watch the films over and over again so you see the camera angles that they chose. Watch The Graduate. Oh, what an amazing film. What an amazing film that is. Look at the various, and Hitchcock. Look at the camera angles that they chose. Look at the colors that they chose. Look at the lighting design that was chosen for the films. Can you direct a bad actor into a worthwhile performance? Yes, you can. You can. You actually can. You can. My husband's sitting over there saying you can re-edit a bad actor into a worthwhile performance, but you can also direct a bad actor into a worthwhile performance as well. Yeah, you can direct a bad actor into a good performance. You just have to know what you're doing. I have done so. It can be done. It's hard work. Oh man, it's hard work. But there you go.